Good evening. Welcome to St. Vincent College on behalf of the St. Vincent Health and Fitness Club. And welcome to this special event in the Physical Culture Education Series. My name is Nicholas Rakulia, and I'm an Associate Professor of Finance and Starting Strength Coach. Before we begin, I would like to thank the members of the St. Vincent College lifting family for the work they put into making this possible. In particular, Karen Morrison and staff Marie Kunkel has put in a tremendous amount of work, as well as the officers of the St. Vincent Health and Fitness Club, led by President Graham Shallow. Without you guys, we would not be here. Thank you. We have a special introduction today by our friend and fellow Masters athlete, the Honorable Tom Corbett.
Nick, thank you for the kind introduction, and good evening, everyone. My apologies for not being with you this evening. Nick had asked me a number of months ago if I would make it, and I told him I would, but unfortunately an obligation outside the state has arisen, and I won't be in Pennsylvania when you're having this meeting. Dr. Sullivan, thank you for coming to St. Vincent. I know that Nick appreciates what you're doing, but I want to thank you also for what you have done for me through Nick in beginning your program. As you can imagine, for the last 10 years that I was in office as Attorney General and as Governor, my exercise regime was not what it should be, and it never included weightlifting. I weightlifted when I was in college playing lacrosse, and that was more than 45 years ago. So you can imagine it's been a while since I had lifted any weights. And I met Dr. Rakulius, and he said, "Why don't you lift some weights?" He convinced me to do it, and it's the best thing that happened to me. The ability to lift weights now compared to where I was a number of years ago is amazing. I compare it to when I started building a sandbox for my grandchildren and started lifting the bags of sand, the 40-pound bags of sand. Because I had been weightlifting, they were easy. I can't imagine what it would have been like but for the weightlifting. It's a great way of keeping yourself in shape, taking a little stress off the legs from running, but building up your endurance, building up your strength. I appreciate that you have passed this along to Nick, and he has passed it along to me. And I want to thank you for everything you have done. People tell me I look a lot better than when I was in office, and they consider it to be the stress of office. I consider it to be that I look better because now I'm weightlifting, and I feel 10 years younger. Again, thank you, and good evening.
Our thanks to Governor Corbett for taking the time to share with us how he has personally benefited from strength training. Tonight's guest, Dr. Jonathon Sullivan, is the author of the Barbell Prescription, Strength Training for Life After 40. Sully earned his MD at the University of Arizona College of Medicine and his PhD in physiology from Wayne State University. He is also a veteran of the United States Marine Corps. Dr. Sullivan currently serves as an attending physician at Detroit Receiving Hospital's Department of Emergency Medicine and a clinical assistant professor of emergency medicine at Wayne State University. He is a diplomat of the American Board of Emergency Medicine and a fellow of the American College of Emergency Physicians and the American Academy of Emergency Physicians. Dr. Sullivan is a member of the grant review committees of the American College of Emergency Physicians and Society for Academic Emergency Medicine. He is an active member of the Starting Strength Coaches Association, delivering the yearly literature review at the Starting Strength Coaches annual conference. That happens to be my favorite part of the weekend. He has authored numerous journal articles, books, chapters, editorials, published abstracts, presentations, and the occasional snarky online commentary. Dr. Sullivan has accomplished much in life, and we are grateful that he is here. However, nothing can testify to success better than the testimonials of those whose lives have been transformed by his work. Please take a moment to read some of these personal stories, which you will find on your chairs when you arrive. After Dr. Sullivan is finished, we are going to open the floor for questions and further discussion. You may approach the microphone, which will be right here in the center, or you can just remain in your seat. Just please be loud when you ask questions. Finally, please join us after the reception for light refreshments. And now, please join me in welcoming Dr. Jonathon Sullivan.
Okay. Or for your technical action, as it turns out. And my goodness, this is going to go off without a hitch. So, and apparently the microphone has to be turned on. Can you hear me? All right, that's great. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Thank you, Nicholas, for the introduction. Thanks to Tom Corbett for the amazing message. I wish I had the opportunity to meet him. Thanks to St. Vincent College. Thanks to the SBC Health and Fitness Club and its officers for once again setting this up and making me feel very much at home and very welcome here. You've kind of been spoiling me all day. And thank you to all of you for coming tonight to hear an ER doctor talk about lifting weights. It's kind of weird, right? So hopefully by the time I'm done, it won't seem so weird. I was here a couple of years ago, and this book was sort of gestating at the time. And I talked about some of the things that I'm going to talk about tonight, but there's going to be a little bit of different emphasis. I see some familiar faces in the crowd, so some of the territory that we're going to cover may seem familiar, but some of it's going to be new. The focus of tonight's talk is ostensibly going to be about this book. Does this thing work? Are we able to put it forward here? Maybe we can add it. And you said that? Yeah, I did. That was my fault. I might be stuck up here. All right, well, I'm stuck up here. You hear me okay? You hear me okay? All right. So, this is theoretically why we're here. Right? We're going to talk about this new book that I wrote with Andy Baker. Andy Baker was my co-pilot for this project. Andy is the owner and operator of Kingwood Strength and Conditioning in Kingwood, Texas. And like me, he has a passionate interest in training for masters, that is, people over 40. And he's kind of a genius in it. And so his contribution to the book was essential, particularly part 3, which I'm going to tell you about tonight, which had to do with the program. But really what we're going to talk about is this idea of the barbell prescription itself, the concept itself, the idea of exercise as a medicine, and how we should prescribe it, which is what the book is about. So why did we write this book? We wrote it for a very important segment of our society, a growing segment of our society, adults over 40. And to get right down to it, the reason we wrote it is because we don't get old and die the way we used to. The way we get old and die is different than it's been throughout most of the history of our species. Throughout most of the history of our species, we died basically of infectious diseases when we didn't die from famine or an arrow in the back. So smallpox, diphtheria, cholera. It's kind of astonishing if you think back in most of human history, how many human beings have just diarrhea to death in our history. Malaria has brought down entire civilizations. It probably helped bring down the Roman Empire. Alexander the Great probably died of malaria. So we don't die that way, and we don't get old that way. Because we don't live the way we used to. We have better medicines, we have cleaner cities, we have a more readily available supply of food than we used to. We have vaccinations. But we also don't live the same way we used to. We don't work as hard as we used to. We're not as physical a being as we used to be. We all have iPhones and recliners, and someday soon we'll have recliners. So It's a long way from our caveman roots. It's a long way from our agrarian roots, where we had to work hard just to get by from day to day. The pattern of our lives has changed, and so the way we get older has changed. Now, we got from cardiovascular disease, from stroke, from complications of high blood pressure, from diabetes, obesity, from cancer, because we lived long enough to get some cancers that we probably didn't used to get that much. And when we do die of infectious diseases, they tend to get us at the extremes of age or ill health, right? Or as a complication of diabetes or obesity or something like that. So, when I spoke to you a couple of years ago, I talked about phenotypes, the pattern of traits or characteristics that we observe when we actually look at an organism. That's what the word means. It's the show type of an organism. It's phenotype. And I told you that two organisms can have very similar genotypes or even identical genotypes, but have very different phenotypes because of their life and their experiences and their environments, which are different. And so we have a different spectrum of aging phenotypes now in this century than we used to have. The way we get old and the way we die, our death phenotypes are different than they used to be. And along with that recognition has come the growing realization, even in the medical mind, that there are limitations to the disease-oriented model of medical practice. And a growing realization that exercise is a medicine. Now, I say it's a growing realization, but in fact, we've known this for a long time. Hippocrates talked about it, Galen talked about it, Paracelsus talked about it, and it never really left the medical dialogue. It's just that the emphasis wasn't there. We got better at understanding disease and treating disease, and so we became more of a sick care profession than a healthcare profession. But now, over the last 20, 30 years, there's been this increased attention to this whole idea of exercise medicine and the powerful impact that exercise, any form of vigorous exercise, not just the exercise I'm going to talk to you about tonight, but any form of vigorous exercise can have on aging and can help turn unhealthy aging into a more healthy form of aging. So, you hear doctors talk about how exercise is a medicine. Exercise is medicine. American College of Sports Medicine some years back started this international, this global initiative, Exercise is Medicine. And they even trademarked the phrase. It seems kind of weird. It's kind of like trademarking insulin controls blood sugar, 2 + 2 = 4, or Kanye is an arrogant ass. It's like you take something that's a simple fact and trademark it. It seems kind of weird, but so I'm going to be careful not to use that exact phrase tonight. Exercise is a medicine and doctors need to prescribe it. But here's the problem. Here's why we wrote it. We don't. We don't prescribe it. Or if we do, we don't really know how to do it right. And there are a couple of reasons for this. Doctors don't learn that much about exercise in medical school. That seems astonishing, but it's true. And the other reason is that even if a doctor does want to write an exercise prescription for the aging adult, he doesn't know the best way to go about that. Because when it comes to that, in the sort of general discussion about exercise medicine and how we should use it, there's lots of heat but little light. So doctors don't really know how to write an exercise prescription. So what do? We tell our patients, get some exercise, right? And that's a little bit like writing a prescription that says medicine. Here's your prescription. Or a prescription that says antibiotics. There's your medicine. There's your prescription, right? Well, that's dumb. No doctor would write that prescription, and yet that same doctor doesn't see anything wrong with telling his patient, just get some exercise. And the patient says, well, what kind of exercise? Well, just whatever you like to go for a walk, go to the park, do something, just, right? So, like I told you 2 years ago, that won't do. And so, I've given a lot of thought to how to to put together an exercise prescription for the aging adult. And this book is the result. The book is divided into 3 parts: the why, the what, and the how. The why is the exercise prescription itself. In other words, trying to figure out the best formulation for the exercise prescription. You see, a prescription has to do a number of things. It has to identify the medicine itself, the formulation of that medicine, the dose of that medicine, its frequency of administration, its duration of treatment, and, at least implicitly, its therapeutic targets. That's what a prescription does. So telling somebody to just get some exercise doesn't do that. And in part 1, we identified what the requirements of the exercise prescription will be and what its therapeutic targets need to be. In part 2, having determined, spoiler alert, that strength training with barbells is an excellent exercise prescription for the aging adult, we go on to describe the exercises in some detail, not in the depth that is in starting strength, which remains the definitive analysis of these exercises, but to give the reader an idea of what the exercise medicine is going to be like, where he can go to learn these exercises, and some basic ideas about equipment in gyms, and gym safety, and so forth. And then in part 3, we have the how. So having identified the exercise medicine, how exactly is it to be administered over the long term to produce ongoing improvements in physical performance and health? We call that programming. That's what Andy's a genius at. And the message of part 3 is that the program, the prescription, is a program. In fact, the message of the whole book is that an exercise prescription for the aging adult will take the form of a training program for the master's athlete. That's kind of the whole book in a nutshell. Unfortunately, you don't get to go home yet. So, let's talk about the why, right? So, to formulate a general exercise prescription, we have to know what we're treating. Our exercise prescription has to be specific to what we're treating. We don't want to give antibiotics to a cancer patient. We don't want to treat diabetes with an asthma medicine. We want to have the correct prescription for what we're trying to treat, which is unhealthy aging. And a couple of years ago, I came here and talked to you in rather gruesome detail about something called the sick aging phenotype. I'm going to talk about it in a little bit less detail tonight, partly because I've already talked to you about it, partly because this talk is focused on something else. Suffice it to say that our general exercise prescription must address this sick aging phenotype that I've described here and in the book and elsewhere. The exercise prescription should also address all of the general fitness attributes, all of the general physical fitness attributes, the things that we think about when we think about physical fitness, strength, endurance, mobility, and so on. And the exercise prescription must meet the same criteria that any medical prescription should meet. And we can discuss some of those in a moment. Again, I spoke to you a couple of years ago about this sick aging phenotype. The sick aging phenotype is a syndrome of syndromes. A syndrome is just a fancy medical word that doctors use to describe something, a bunch of things that go together all the time. A bunch of clinical features or signs or symptoms that frequently go together. And the sick aging phenotype is a syndrome of syndromes. It includes sarcopenia, which is the loss of muscle mass, osteopenia, which is the loss of bone mineral density, and frailty, which is in itself a syndrome and includes sarcopenia and osteopenia along with other elements. What is frailty? Frailty is a term that's frequently used by gerontologists, geriatricians, and it kind of means what you think it would be. It means, basically, that you're easy to break. That's what it means to be frail. It means that you catch a pneumonia that a younger person would shake off in a couple of weeks, but it kills you. It means that you fall down, and where a younger person might get a bad bruise and be sore for a few days, you break your hip, which is a catastrophe. Right? Frailty just means that you're easy to break. It goes with loss of independence, it goes with loss of function, and it goes with loss of human dignity and hope. In addition, the sick aging phenotype includes the metabolic syndrome, which is not my own invention, but a well-recognized constellation of features, including insulin resistance, obesity, the accumulation of visceral fat, high blood pressure, dyslipidemia, risk factor for cardiovascular disease, and systemic inflammation. Now, systemic inflammation is not actually a classical feature of the metabolic syndrome, but it probably should be because they go together all the time. And by systemic inflammation, I mean a sort of chronic, subclinical, smoldering, systemic inflammation that inflicts damage on joints and vascular tissues and other tissues throughout the body, and constitutes the basis of what's come to be called inflammaging. So some of the biologists of aging now talk about this inflammaging. It's a complex topic in itself. Tends to go into the metabolic system. And finally, the sick aging phenotype includes polypharmacy, which is a word that means many drugs. And I talked to you about that a couple of years ago too. The patient who comes in and she's got a shopping bag full of prescription medicines. Many of them redundant, many of them interacting with each other in unhealthy ways, right? And she has no idea what she's doing with these medicines. She has no idea how to take them because they've all been prescribed by a bunch of different doctors. And she needs a bunch of different medicines just to get from one day to the next. Polypharmacy. It's an epidemic, and it's a disease, and it hurts people, and it kills people. And medical dependence. What does medical dependence mean? Medical dependence just means that you spend a significant, disproportionate amount of your life under medical care, in the hospital, in the clinic, in the emergency department, in the transitional care unit, in the intensive care unit. That's where you spend a lot of your time. And you have to, because you're that sick. That's medical dependence. This is the sick aging phenotype, and it's our target. So, our exercise prescription has to get at that. It has to get at that. And that's kind of a tough nut to crack, because it's a syndrome of syndromes. It's a rather broad constellation of features. It encompasses a lot of pathophysiology. And once it starts to dig in, it's really hard to get at it. So, that's the sick aging phenotype. Now, I always like to say, I can talk about the sick aging phenotype in a lot of detail, and what its components are, and how it develops. But we know it when we see it, right? And this is one face of the sick aging phenotype. There's your eye chair, right there. Right? You can see there's the big tub of medicine feeding directly into the chair. You got the auto feeder there with the KFC and the McDonald's coming in. You got the Coca-Cola IV. You know, you got all the various media devices. He doesn't have to get up and go anywhere. And we look at it, and I see a bunch of you smiling, and it is kind of a cool image. I wish I knew who made it. You know, if you're watching this, get in touch with me, because this is perfect. But it's really pretty grim. The suffering encompassed by this image is unthinkable. This is not what we were made for. This is not what we're here for. This is not what was intended. Again, we can talk in a great deal of detail about it. I show you this slide, which is similar to what I showed you a couple of years ago, mostly to underscore the central role of insulin resistance in the development of the metabolic syndrome and therefore of the sick aging phenotype. Resistance to insulin signaling underlies a vast range of pathophysiological processes that are at work in unhealthy aging. Insulin resistance, the loss of sensitivity to cellular insulin signaling, is a physiological catastrophe. And one of the things that means is that the loss of muscle is a physiological catastrophe. Now, how do I get from there to there? Right? It's a physiological catastrophe because muscle tissue is or should be a vast landscape of insulin signaling, insulin receptors. It should be a vast sink for glucose and for triglyceride, for fat. It should make up a significant portion of our total body insulin signaling and insulin sensitivity. And when we lose good, strong, functional muscle, we're losing insulin sensitivity. And we're promoting the development of the sick aging phenotype at the biochemical level, at the tissue level, and even at the entire organismal level, even sort of at the psychological level. Now, I told you that the general exercise prescription has to meet the criteria of just about any other prescription. And here they are. We want an exercise prescription that's safe. Because hurting people just to make them healthier is stupid, right? Ask me how I know. I'm a doctor. We kind of do that sometimes, right? Hurt people to make them better. That's not a good idea, right? So our exercise prescription must be safe. And this is one of the first things that brings barbells to our attention because strength training with barbells is incredibly safe. That's backed up in the literature. We want our exercise prescription to have a wide therapeutic window. What does that mean? The therapeutic window describes the difference or the ratio between the minimum therapeutic dose, the smallest dose that will produce a therapeutic effect, and the minimum toxic dose, the smallest dose that will produce a toxic effect. So, if I have a medicine where the difference between the effective dose and the toxic dose is very narrow, that's not a great medicine. Right? We might have to use it. There are medicines like that, but we hate them because they're tricky and you can hurt people with them at what might seem like a reasonable dose. Thank you. On the other hand, we love medicines with a wide therapeutic window, right? Where the difference between the minimum effective dose and the minimum toxic dose is wide. Then we have a whole range of dosing parameters to work with that medicine. So our exercise medicine ideally should be like that. There should be a wide range between the minimum dose and the maximum dose. We want our exercise medicine to be comprehensive. What does that mean? It means that we want it to address all of the general fitness attributes, and we want it to address all of the body's energy systems. In other words, we want an exercise medicine that will make you as completely physically fit as that exercise medicine can make you. We want it to be fairly comprehensive. We don't want a bunch of different exercise medicines involved. We don't want sort of the analogy of polypharmacy in your exercise prescription. We'd like to check all the boxes. We want our exercise prescription to be specific. That means it should address what we're trying to treat, the sick aging phenotype and its components, or as many of them as possible. And finally, we want our exercise medicine to be as efficient and simple as possible, but no simpler. So, what about these fitness attributes I keep talking about? Different people unpack these in various ways. The way we talk about them in the book, we identify strength, power, mobility, balance, endurance, and body composition. And if you want to, we can talk afterwards about what these specific fitness attributes are. And again, there are different ways to list them. This is how we list them in the book. And in the book, we discuss in detail why barbell training addresses all of these general fitness attributes. So, after going through a whole lot of data and a whole lot of physiology, in part one, we come to the conclusion that strength training attacks the sick aging phenotype. Partly because we know it attacks the metabolic syndrome. That's known, that's been studied. And Strength training with barbells, like most forms of vigorous exercise, improves insulin sensitivity, moderates blood pressure, has a beneficial impact on derangements in serum lipids, and attacks the metabolic syndrome. And anything that attacks the metabolic syndrome is going to attack the circadian phenotype. But in addition, strength training with barbells also gets at the sarcopenia, the loss of muscle mass that we saw earlier, which not all exercise does. It gets at the loss of bone mineral density, the osteopenia that we saw earlier, which not all exercise does. And most vigorous forms of exercise get at systemic inflammation. What about polypharmacy and medical dependence? I have to tell you, we don't know if barbell training gets at that, because we don't know if any form of exercise medicine really gets at that, because it's never really been studied in barbells or any other form of training that I know of. So there's a little bit of a question mark there. Strength training with barbells addresses the entire range of fitness attributes. So, guess what? Strength training with barbells improves strength. So we can check that one off. And strength training with barbells improves power, because power is just strength displayed quickly. That's all power is. It's strength quickly. So the analogy, the example that I've always used, I probably used it a couple of years ago, is like, you may be strong enough to get up off the toilet. But if it takes you all afternoon, you've got big problems. That's the difference between the absolute strength and power. Strength training improves endurance. Damn it. So, this is one of these long-standing, very pervasive mythologies that we have to deal with. Well, you might get strong, but your cardio is going to suck. You're not going to derive any cardiovascular benefit, and you're not going to get any endurance improvement from it. And there's a growing body of data that says, that's not really true. And more to the point, it does not fit our field experience at all. Right? Because over and over and over again, we see detrained masters come into the gym, and the first thing they notice is an improvement in their endurance, in their ability to engage in sustained physical activity. And I've never really understood why strength training would not result in some endurance improvement, but we can talk about that later if we want. Mobility. Another long-standing, very pernicious mythology about strength training. You're going to end up muscle-bound and immobile, and you're going to be stiff, and you're going to be like a wooden toy soldier, right? Well, but this is simply not so. It's not borne out by the data, and it's not borne out by our field experience as coaches. We know that this is not true. If you train a movement pattern throughout its entire natural range of motion, and make that movement pattern strong about its natural range of motion, how does that result in an increase in mobility? Actually, it results in an increase in mobility. And where we see this particularly profoundly is with the shoulder exercise. I mean, that's where it becomes sort of the most dramatic. People who have poor shoulder mobility, we observe dramatic improvements in their shoulder mobility with training over time. But other improvements as well. Balance. Right? The ability, quite simply put, to not fall down. Right? Strength training improves that because balance is a function of strength. How do we maintain our balance? We apply forces against the ground reaction force to maintain our center of gravity in a stable position. Right? We use our muscles to do that. We use strength to do that. And we can train for that very simply by using our barbell while standing up. By performing human movement patterns standing up and doing the exercises that way. And none of the exercises in the exercise prescription that I'm going to describe to you include falling down. In other words, when you do these exercises, we would really prefer that you not fall down the barbell. And because you're performing them standing up, we have introduced the possibility that you can in fact fall down. We would just really like you to not do that. And by training you with the barbell and making you stronger in that movement, we train your ability to not fall down. finally, body composition. When athletes talk about body composition, they generally tend to want to be a little bit leaner, have a little bit more muscle, have a little bit more bone, and most of us would like a little bit less fat. And in particular, we would like a little bit less of that pathological form of fat, the visceral fat, what I call the sick fat, that we see in the metabolic syndrome. So, strength training hits the general fitness athletes. Strength training with barbells checks off the general fitness athletes. So, it is our contention, as argued at length in this book, that strength training with barbells meets the criteria for the general exercise prescription for the aging adult. It's safe. It has a wide therapeutic window. How is that? Remember I told you the wide therapeutic window is a wide range between the minimum effective dose and the minimum toxic dose? Well, when I'm training somebody with movement patterns, I can start with a broomstick. I can start with a PVC pipe. I can actually train the movement pattern without a barbell until it gets strong, and then add a broomstick. And then go to a 10-pound bar that accepts standard plates. And then I can make that 10-pound bar a 12-pound bar. And then I can make that 12-pound bar a 14-pound bar. And then I can make it a 20-pound bar and a 30-pound bar. And now we're with the 30-pound bar. And pretty soon we'll be with the 45-pound bar. And pretty soon, my 70-year-old client will come in and put 100 pounds on her back and squat it down below parallel and will stand up again. And she'll go, when did that happen? Right? So I can put as little or as much weight on the bar as I want. That is a wide therapeutic window. That is an exquisitely dosable exercise medicine. Exquisitely dosable, exquisitely titratable, exquisitely quantifiable. We're talking about numbers here. We're talking about an exercise prescription in which we can actually document quantitative progress. I am not the kind of personal trainer who says, yeah, your key is so much more aligned than when you started with me. I think your key is much more aligned than when you started. Yes, it definitely is. And your aura is better too. And you look so much more graceful. You look great. Up close, it's exciting, right? That's not what we're interested in at all. We're interested in numbers. We're interested in therapeutic targets that quantitatively improve over time. Barbell training for strength attacks the circadian phenotype, has a routine, and it is simple and efficient. Twice a week is all I need for most of my clients. Twice a week. 90 minutes, twice a week. And it's transformative. So, 90 minutes, twice a week, 4 exercises, 4 barbell exercises, and for some people, a conditioning component. It's simplicity itself. It's the same 4 exercises all the time. So, there's no entertainment component to it, right? I'm not going to change things around to make it new and fresh and interesting every time. Just like your doctor doesn't change your diabetes medication from week to week to make it more fresh and interesting. Right? You'd start to think that something was kind of goofy, right? So why would we do that with your exercise? We're not going to. So, that's the why. What's the what? I just told you. 4 big multi-joint barbell exercises and a conditioning. And this is the guts of it, really. This is all we're doing. We were talking about this earlier today. Nicholas was talking to me about, we have a potential client, a potential trainee, who has some physical issues. And they were kind of consulting with me about it. And I told them what I think about it. No matter how old, no matter how debilitated, no matter how deconditioned, no matter how weak, no matter how mobility limited, I always think about this the same way. This is what we're doing. We find the normal human movement patterns that remain in that individual and their full extent. We figure out what you can do. How can you still move? Which of these movement patterns do you retain, and how complete are they? Okay, that's what you've got. We're going to focus on what you can do and not on what you can't do. And we're going to take what you can do and we're going to load it. We're going to load the movements that you're still capable of performing. The movements, not the muscles, not the joints, not the arms, not the legs, not the parts. We're going to take the complete human movement patterns that you are still capable of performing and that make up the brick and mortar of your physical life. And we're going to load those with barbells. And we're going to make those movements stronger. And when we make those movements stronger, we make all the muscles and joints and bones and ligaments and tendons that contribute to that movement stronger in the correct proportion to the correct degree, allowing each one of those components to contribute its proper natural share at the correct time to that movement pattern. We train movement. We make movement stronger. And the first of these movements that we make stronger is the squat. Now, this is my client, Anne. She's going to be our model tonight for all of these movement patterns. This is Anne performing the squat. So, Anne is a retired nurse, and she's 75 years old. And she's warming up here with 105 pounds. And she's performing the squat, which trains a vast volume of muscle tissue through, as you can see, a fairly long range of motion. Does Anne look immobile to you or muscle bound? She does not. You can see how her balance will be challenged, right? And you can see how doing a lot of these exercises might just challenge your endurance a little bit. That's great. But what if you come in and you can't do this exercise? The title of tonight's talk is the Barbell Prescription for Everybody, right? What if you can't do this? Well, we have an app for that, right? Here's an illustration from the book demonstrating one approach that we have to remedial squat program. This is an individual who's unable to get as deep as you just saw Anne going and stand back up again. Because he's immobile? No, it has nothing to do with the flexibility. Usually it just has to do with strength. They're not strong enough to get down there and stand back up again. So we make them strong. We make them strong enough to do that and stand back up again. We find the height at which he can squat, and we put a bungee cord across his rack there. And when he touches it with his butt, then he drives his hips up and stands up. And we can do that for 3 sets of 5. We lower the bungee cord and make him squat that way. And when he can do that for 3 sets of 5, we lower the bungee cord again, right? It's just like increasing the load on the bar. It's just progressive overload. And when we get him to where he can squat below parallel and touch his butt to that bungee cord and drive his hips up again, then we add a barbell. And then we're off to the races. Some people require more intensive interventions, and those are described in the book. Here's an Anne again, performing the deadlift. This is the sine qua non of normal human movement pattern. Is there anybody in here who doesn't have to bend over and pick stuff up sometimes? That's this movement pattern. Anne is warming up again with 135 pounds on the bar in the deadlift. And not only is she training her hips and her legs to lift this weight, she's also training her ability to transmit the force generated by her hips and her legs up her back so that it can be transmitted down her arms to the load being held in her hands. In other words, one of the things that Anne is doing with this exercise, like all the other exercises, is she's training her back to be a power conduit. Something that transmits force instead of being crushed by force. Right? All of the exercises train stability. And this exercise loads the hips, it loads the spine, so it generates bone mineral density improvement. And it doesn't just train the hips and the back and the legs, it also trains the chest and the arms and you can imagine that she might have a stronger grip than she used to. I think she talks about that in one of these testimonials that you have in front of you. What if you can't do that? We have an app for that, right? So here's a gentleman who cannot extend his back completely with the bar sitting on the floor, so we elevate the bar until he can get his back extended properly. He performs the exercise from there. Or he can do a rack pull. Here's Randy Winfrey, our friend and coach Randy Winfrey, demonstrating the rack pull, fully described in the book. There are other remedial exercises for the deadlift as well. Almost anybody can do some form of deadlift, and training is an indispensable exercise. Here's Anne performing the standing overhead press. The standing overhead press. She's pressing over her head while standing up. Stresses the spine, stresses the hips, in addition to the shoulders and the arms. Right? And introduces the possibility of falling down. Right? We'd like for Anne not to fall down with the barbell, so it's going to improve her balance as well. This is Anne pressing 67.5 pounds over her head. She had pretty significant shoulder mobility limitations when she came to us. What if you can't do that? Well, we have an app for that. Right? We have an answer for that. This is a barbell prescription for everyone. Some people can perform seated dumbbell presses. Some people can perform one-armed inclined bar presses like this. Some people, quite frankly, can't press. We become bench press specialists. We come up with other remedial exercises for them. We have them perform a standing curl instead. You'll see an example of that later tonight. And of course, anytime you're talking about barbells, you got to have the bench press, right? You got to bench press. Everyone has the bench press. So if you ask any starting strength coach, you tell them, you have to get rid of one exercise from your program. You're not allowed to have 4 anymore. You can only have 3. Which one are you going to get rid of? He'll tell you this one, right? Why? Because although it's a valuable exercise and allows a lot of weight to be handled, and one of its great values is it really helps drive up your overhead press, right? It's got the shortest kinetic chain. It doesn't involve quite as much muscle mass as the other exercises, and you can't even fall down, right? What is great about it, though, is it allows a lot of weight to be handled. It's a real confidence builder for older adults, and almost anybody can do some form of bench press. And then there's a conditioning component for athletes who need it, right? A general conditioning. And we like high-intensity interval training. We like sleds, bikes, rowers, right? This is Randy Winfrey demonstrating the use of the prowler, which is a sled that we push for high-intensity interval. Randy, I guess Randy got a great workout this day. Like, he was shooting all these exercises in the prowler. It's perfect fun. I wish I could have been there. So, that's the what, an introduction to the exercises. Then we have the how. And the message here is simple, and I told you before already. The exercise prescription for the aging adult is a training program for the master's athlete. This is the part that specifies all those quantities that we talked about. The dose, the frequency, the intensity, the volume, the parameters, and the modulation over time of the exercise prescription. This is where we get down to specifics. Because we're not really actually interested in just exercise. We're interested in training. What's the difference? When somebody trains, what they're doing is they're manipulating training variables as part of an explicit long-term program aimed at the optimization of physiological performance activities. That's a mouthful, isn't it? So I'll say it again. They are manipulating training variables as part of a long-term program aimed at the optimization of physical and performance activities. We have a word for a person who does that. We call them an athlete. We got in a little trouble here a couple of years ago if you're using the word. I want to stand by it. That's what an athlete does. People exercise. Athletes train. And the prescription is a training program. So there's a point early on in the book where we stop talking about the aging adult. We start talking about the master's athlete. start their program and they do their first regular training and they fill out their log for the first time, and I show them the numbers in the log, and I say to them, now you have a training log. Now you're manipulating training materials. Now you're an athlete. As long as you do this, that's what you'll be. The master's athlete. All training programs have the same basic underlying structure. Stress, recovery, adaptation. It works like magic. You come into the gym. I give you a workout. I apply a training stress. You go home, you are weaker than when you walk through the door. Right? You're whooped. You go home. You eat a steak. And you get some sleep. Right? You drink your water. You minimize external stressors. You don't go do Krav Maga the next day. Right? You don't go do judo the next day. You rest. You recover. And when you come back in a few days, you'll be stronger. You have adapted to the training stress that was applied to you. So now you're stronger. Mission accomplished. Right? Now, at your new level of strength, you are able to absorb a bigger training stress. So I will apply one to you, right? Or you will apply one to yourself. And you'll leave a little weaker, and you'll recover, and you'll come back a little stronger and apply a bigger training stress. Repeat as necessary, right? This is the foundation of all training. We call it progressive overload. Now, that can't go on forever, right? Because if I was able to add more weight to the bar, because that's what we're doing, we're adding more weight to the bar. If I was able to do that forever, then you would get infinitely strong, right? And I don't know anybody who's infinitely strong, except for Joseph Henry. So eventually the programming will become more complex, and the progress will become more slow. It won't stop, but it will slow down. And the cost will be increased training complexity. But no matter how complex or how advanced the program, if you strip it down to its guts, you'll find this, the stress recovery adaptation cycle. For a program template, a program model, we like the starting strength model because it just works. It works every single time. It works like magic. There are other programs that work. We like this one, right? It's very, very flexible. It can be used in all sorts of different situations, and it just works every single time. That is our extensive field experience. And here's what it looks like. And I'm going to show you this, not to go into the details of the program, because I kind of like you to read the book and see the details of the program, right? But instead to show you how the programs are presented in this book. As prescriptions. The formulation of the exercise medicine, its indications, who it's indicated for, its parameters, how it's progressed, how it's modulated, what its short-term and long-term targets are. These programs are the prescription. They are the Barbell Prescription. This is a program, the Rank Novice program, that is generally applicable to just about any athlete. Even people in their late 60s can usually walk in the gym and start this program. Some people require different programs. So you can see here the indications for this one. We would use it with discretion in people under 40 because they can tolerate a 3-day program, right? We would use it preferentially in people over 60. There's the indications for athletes who cannot engage in 3-day training. It can be instituted at the beginning of training or at any point in the novice progression as indicated. So all of our training programs are presented as and treated as prescriptions, exercise prescriptions in this text. 1-day-a-week programs for particularly elderly or detrained or deconditioned athletes who can make progress on it. And this program in particular underscores something that I talked about before. You see a bunch of different exercises. There's squat, bench, deadlift, press, lat press. But the program doesn't necessarily indicate all of those. When we describe it in the book, you say we're talking which one of these movements, or which set of these movements can the athlete perform. And those are the movements that we'll perform once a week, loading them with the barbell. Finally, at the end of the book, there's a chapter on the female master. Not because it was an afterthought. We didn't go, oh, we should put in a chapter about the women. Yeah, let's do that, right? That wasn't it, right? The reason it was at the end was because, first of all, it nicely summarizes a lot of the themes that we talked about throughout the book, and how for females, things just aren't that different. They're not a different species, right? There are some minor modifications that some female masters can benefit from. But in general, they should train in this approach for exactly the same reasons that men should. And they should train with the same exercises that men should. And to a very large extent, they should train with exactly the same programs that men should. And we also took extra care to debunk a final piece of mythology that you all heard about. The horror of bulking up, right? If you're a female, you work out with weights, bulking up. You've got it coming to you. Everybody told you not to lift weights. Everybody told you to go to Pilates or yoga instead. No, you chose to get strong, and so now, one morning, you wake up, and you look in the bathroom mirror, and you see Schwarzenegger in a night. Right? That does not happen. That never, ever happens. Right? So let's just take that off the table right now. This is a female master. This is my client, Janet. Janet is 66 years old. She weighs about 102 pounds soaking wet after 2 years of training. Janet is here pulling 200 pounds in the desert. A couple of weeks later, I had her pull 205. Not Schwarzenegger. So, let's do a couple of quick case studies, and then you'll be almost done. Let's talk about, I'm going to get over here where I can read this easier. Let's talk about Shelly. Shelly's a colleague of mine. She's a 65-year-old physician who's taking pretty good care of herself. Lifelong exercise, no mobility limitations. I started her on a 2-day novice progression. Monday, the squat, press, deadlift. Friday, the squat, bench, deadlift. She progressed to an advanced novice model very shortly. Monday, squat, press, deadlift. Friday, squat, bench, power clean. She's one of those masters athletes who's able to perform the power clean, likes it, tolerates it, and has some aptitude. So, we let her do it. Presently, Shelly progressing intermediate status. Now, Shelly's kind of hardcore, so we used her on a master's modification. We used a modification of the master's program, of the Texas program, the Texas method, which is typically considered a young man's grueling intermediate program. But we have a modification of the Texas method, a number of modifications of the Texas method that can be used by particularly dedicated masters. And Shelly is on these programs now. And just to make a long story short, progressing on this program, Shelly has gotten to a squat 170 by 5, press 70 by 5, deadlift 200 by 3, bench press 105 for a single, and the power clean 5 sets of 3 at 60 pounds. Now, I'm here to tell you that for a 65-year-old female, that's pretty cool. When I made up this slide, those were her numbers. But I was coming on my way here for this tour kind of thing. She ended her last cycle on Monday. So Friday was sort of the hanging chad day for her. We didn't want to start her on a new cycle before I left because it was going to be gone for a week. So we had what we call a PR day. And so Shelly put up 185 in the squat, and she put her at 215 in the deadlift. And here she is again at 105 for a single on the bench, using the Texas method at 65. Now I'm going to tell you about a very different case. John. Some of you may have read about John because we wrote him up recently for the Start Training website. John's pretty cool. John is a 90-year-old World War II era Army veteran. Kind of got in on the last 3 months of World War II, drafted out of high school. Relatively independent and sharp as a tack, right? But started to lose muscle, started to lose mobility, started to lose function. So what did he do? He used the interwebs and he went out and he did his homework. He came to me with a stack of papers from the peer-reviewed literature saying, I need to lift weights, I've got to add muscle mass, I've got sarcopenia, osteopenia, frailty, right? He came to me with that. I'm like, dude, I got you covered, right? So we started him on a 2-day novice progression. The squat, the curl, and the deadlift on Monday, the squat, the bench, and the deadlift on Friday. Why did we choose these exercises? We'll talk about that in a minute. We eventually progressed him to an individualized novice model with the squat, the curl, and the deadlift with rotating reps on Monday, and the squat, the bench, and high-intensity interval training with the bike, which he thoroughly despises, on Friday. This is John performing the deadlift. Now, John has significant mobility limitations in his knees and hips, but he and I and everybody else who knows him has noticed that he's standing a lot taller these days. John did not stand like this when he came to us. And he's able to perform the deadlift pretty much in a standard fashion. Doesn't require any significant modifications for the deadlift, in spite of the fact that he's got some hip and knee mobility limitations. He's a little bit kyphotic. He's got some rounding in his upper back. John can't lay flat on a pressing bench, again, because of his kyphosis. But all we have to do is raise the head of his bench a little bit, give him his little special pillow there that he's very fussy about, support his neck a little bit, and he can perform this movement pattern and get very strong. John can't do an overhead press. He has too much shoulder mobility limitation. For him to get the bar up overhead, he can't get it over his shoulder joints, and it wouldn't be safe. It's not going to be productive for training there. And so again, we focus on what he can do rather than what he cannot do. So we have to do the curl, the barbell curl. Barbell curl is not a useless exercise, right? We like it because it's an upper body exercise for strengthening the upper body, not just the biceps, but also the shoulder joint. And it's performed standing up, so the training's balance. Actually, it's pretty excellent for training balance because you get a nice big moment arm that sort of challenges your balance as you go back up and down with the bar. And finally, there's the squat. So John is 90, and he has some knee and hip mobility limitations. And he was weak in the bottom of the squat. So what we started him out with was assisted chair stands. He would sit in the chair, I would hold his hands, and I would help him stand up out of the chair. And then he had to stand up out of the chair by himself. And then he had to stand up out of the chair by himself with a 4-pound kettlebell. And then he had to stand up out of the chair by himself with a 10-pound kettlebell, and then a 15-pound kettlebell. Oh, kettlebell weighs 15 pounds. You know what, John? We have a 15-pound bar. So it would be the exact same amount of weight. We figured out how to get the bar on his back. And he was able to squat with the bar on his back down in the chair and then stand up again. You see pretty good hip drive. Right? And for him, actually, the exercise involves a little bit more grace because with the strap assisted model that we see here, he has to take care and make sure that the bar stays in the right part of his back and it stays balanced. So he has to be a little bit more attentive to the position of the bar than we have to be with the standard squat. And then eventually, we took away his chair, not completely, right? John has challenges to his proprioception, knowing where his body is in space. So we had to be kind of careful with that. He needs a box. He needs some sort of recorder that he can touch with his but not to sit on, but just to tell him, yeah, you arrived, right? So that he knows when to drive his hips out, right? So we eventually put him on the box so that he can squat below parallel, just like we squat below parallel. This is John the other day, warming up with 65 pounds in the squats. His work set was 93 by 5 by 3. John's kind of a badass. Yeah, the shirt says, made in 1926, 90 years of awesome. Currently, John squats 93 for 3 sets of 5. He curls 47 and a half for 3 sets of 5. He benches 57 for 3 sets of 5. And the other day, he came in after a brief layoff from the deadlift for some pain in his hip. He hadn't deadlifted really heavy in a few weeks. And I said, well, I want to get you back up to that 130 again, because he had done 130 for a single. The way we were progressing him was 1 week he'd do 130 for a single, the next week he'd do 130 for 3 singles. And the week after that he'd do 130 for 3, a triple. And the week after that he'd do 130 for 5, and then we'd have to do the bar. Well, we got to the single, and then he started having trouble with his head. So he came back, and Friday was the last day before I was going on a tour. He's like, I want to get that 130 today. I said, okay, let's do the single. So we went to the single. He said, I feel strong today. I think I'm going to be able to do the triple. I said, we're going to do the single. He said, I feel strong. I think I can do the triple. And I've been working with him for a while, so it's like, okay, John, feels good. We can do the triple. Have a say. So he gets up there, and the single goes right up, and I'm like, okay, do the triple. And he does the triple, and the last rep of the triple looks pretty heavy. And then he doesn't let go of the bar. And he's like down there, and he's looking over at me, and I'm like, yeah, whatever. And so he does the 5. We did 130 for 5. And it was a beautiful thing to watch. So, what are the conclusions? The conclusion is you should read our book. A more substantive conclusion is that what we talk about in this book is we take the idea of an exercise prescription for the aging adult and how do we formulate it, how are we going to get that done. And where we end up is a training program for the athlete of aging, a master's athlete. We just make human movement patterns strong. And when we make human movement patterns stronger, we make people stronger. When we make people stronger, we make them healthier. This approach, this form of exercise medicine, is available to almost everybody. It is very flexible. It's generally applicable. No matter how weak you think you are, no matter how detrained you are, no matter how far gone you think you are, this exercise medicine is quite probably available to you, and it will do amazing things to you. It is an exercise prescription that has been transformed into a training program for the master's athlete. I wanted to thank my co-author, Andy Baker, Mark Rippetoe, Steph Bradford, the publishers, Nassim Taleb, who never writes book introductions, but he wrote an introduction to our book, my wonderful fellow coaches who set this up, particularly Julio. He was the mastermind behind this entire thing, not just tonight, but the whole week. And to all of you, and to all my fellow coaches around the world, and in particular to all of my wonderful clients. And I thank you for your attention.
This time we're going to do some Q&A. I know some students have other things they have to go to, so if you're a student, you need to take off, go ahead. But otherwise, we'll open the floor to questions and answers. You can either go up to the microphone if you'd like, or if you have a big mouth and can ask from your seat, that's fine too. Sully, would you repeat the question after this?
I will.
All right.
I'm a little hearing impaired, so speak loudly.
10-year longitudinal study of two similarly sized nursing homes. In the control nursing home, we simply took vital signs once a week. In the experimental nursing home, they instituted a rigorous exercise program. I can't tell you the details of what they did, but it was a significant exercise program. After 10 years, what they found in the experimental nursing home is the life expectancy increased by 6 years. The incidence of influenza dropped by 80%. The incidence of the common head cold dropped by 90%. And insulin-dependent diabetics, their dependence on medication was
Insulin.
Now, you may be familiar with this.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that particular study, or if I've read it, I've forgotten about it. And the reason I've forgotten about it is because there's a ton of data out there, right? So if you look at this book, what we tried to do with this book, and in particular what I was trying to do with part one of this book, was to just end the argument about this, right? To basically pull together all of the data and all the literature that I've seen over the past 6 or 7 years on this topic of aging and exercise, and in particular resistance exercise in the aging adult. Put it all in one place, in a way that was accessible to me. There are more than 500 peer-reviewed references noted in this book. So this is not your typical exercise book. This is an exercise book with footnotes to the exercise science and biomedical literature. So that kind of program, or that kind of study that you're talking about, is actually not that unusual, which raises an important question, doesn't it? Like, why aren't we doing this? So I want to tell you a story. Can I tell a story? Is that all right? I told the story to so you guys don't have to listen to it. I told the story this morning. It's like, this story really gets me. So, a few years ago, we opened a geriatric emergency department at my hospital. It wasn't actually a separate emergency department. It was like a little wing or a couple of wings within the existing emergency department. Right? So it was a special place within the emergency department where older patients could get care that was directed at their demographic, right? And we could plug them into the geriatric clinic. We have a state-of-the-art geriatric clinic at our hospital. And as part of getting ready to launch this geriatric ER, one of the geriatricians came down to talk to us and told us how this was going to work and how the patients would be plugged into the geriatric clinic and so on and so forth. And he mentioned in the course of his talk, in our clinic, in our geriatric clinic, 60% of the patients, 60-70% of the patients have a diagnosis of frailty, as we talked about earlier. You see the break. They actually meet the diagnostic criteria for frailty. So after the talk was over, he goes outside, and I go outside and call him out there, and I sort of button him a little bit, and I say, hey, I'm really interested in frailty. And he looks at me and he's like, you are? You're an ER doctor, right? You're interested in strokes and heart attacks and gunshot wounds and stuff like that. And, no, I'm really interested in frailty. And I'm really interested in exercise for frailty. He said, I'm like, yeah, right. So we're talking about it a little bit, and I said, in particular, I'm interested in the role of strength training to treat frailty. And he goes, like this, and he starts to roll his eyes, and I'm thinking, okay, here it comes. And he goes, totally surprised me, he said, that is like the most important thing. It's like, that is the most important thing. It's the best thing they can do. That kind of, and I was telling this morning, it's like, he even makes like the universal symbol for weight training. It's like, they gotta do some of that, right? They've gotta do some of that. And I'm like, okay, cool, like, great. So, do we have anything that we're doing to plug them in? And he's like, no. Don't? Right? You just told me that it was like the most important thing. And you're right, it is the most important thing because I've been reading the literature up and down the wazoo on this for years now. You're absolutely right. They got to do some of that. So it is exactly analogous to a situation where I'm working in a medical center and I'm talking to a cardiologist, a colleague, and I say, hey, Mr. Heart Doctor, what is the state-of-the-art standard of care for a patient presenting with an ST7 elevation myocardial infarction? You know, the big one, Elizabeth, I'm coming home, the big heart attack, right? And he would say to me, the standard of care is to immediately activate the cardiac catheterization laboratory and transport the patient without delay to the cardiac cath lab for percutaneous revascularization care. He would be right. And I would say to him, so do we have a cath lab? He'd say, no, we don't. Stupid. So the real question raised by that study and all the others is, why aren't we doing that? And I don't have a good answer for that. Actually, I do have a good answer for that. I asked Dr. Okulia's class this morning, why aren't we doing that? I mean, every hospital in the country has a cath lab, but they don't have a gym. They don't have an exercise medicine program. Why do you think that is?
I think for this area is our culture. Appalachia starts in lower upstate New York. It's shaped like a kidney. It runs just north of Birmingham, Alabama. It includes two major cities, Chattanooga, Tennessee, and Pittsburgh. And within that area, people eat garbage. The Food Network did a program in West Virginia, which is in Appalachia. And fourth graders had no idea what it was.
Oh yeah, I agree. There are cultural issues to be sure, but we know the medical community has access to the kind of data that you just cited. So why aren't we doing it? Right? Every hospital in the country has a cath lab. How come every country in the hospital doesn't have a gymnasium and exercise centers?
Can't build it.
What?
Insurance, can't build it.
Yeah, it's money. Who's going to get rich doing that? It's a pretty cynical observation, but when people ask me these questions like, are you seeing, like, yeah, a little bit, I'm seeing some improvement, I'm seeing some growing recognition, but do you have any idea how much you can bill for a visit to the cath lab? Do you have any idea how much you can bill for teaching a 7-year-old lady to squat? Squat. Next question. Sir.
What's the most extreme case that you've had with your clients that you've trained?
Extreme is a relative term. I think John first started with us. He was pretty bowed, he was pretty steep, he was pretty weak. His mobility was pretty bad. He knew what he needed to do. His mind has always been sharp. His family dotes over him. I mean, it's really beautiful to see him with his family. And his kids would come here, drop him off. They'd walk. Grace was upstairs. They'd walk him up the stairs. They'd drop him off. First couple of times, his daughter, she said, "Can I use your office?" What she was really, I think, Susan, I know this is what you were really doing. She was like watching. It's like nobody's going to hurt her grandma. Nobody's going to hurt her dad, right? Not going to happen. So now, and he would come in, you know, and we kind of get him started. We were gentle with him appropriately. Now they drop him off in the parking lot, and he bursts through the door like Kramer. I'm here. Pretty cool. Kind of an extreme case. Everyone's an extreme case in a way. I'm working with a younger master right now, and a very nice man who found us, and he has some sort of idiopathic Parkinson-like movement disorder that began to afflict him about 6 years ago. And his initial approach to neurology was not productive for him, and unfortunately, he did not continue following the people who were best able to help him with that. Since he started with me, I really insisted that he see neurology. He's getting really good care now. But he does have some sort of underlying movement disorder that is very weird. What I've told him is your motor space, in other words, the grid, the matrix of your motor space that is encoded by your cerebellum and the parts of your brain that is responsible for movement is not square. It's not a grid. It's been skewed. It's twisted, right? So he thinks that he's square. At the top of the press, he thinks that he's like this, but he's actually like this. With the bar on his back, he thinks it's straight, but it's actually like this, right? He's skewed, right? Which has a significant impact on his training. And I've had to learn to coach in reverse with him. Because when I give him a cue, he'll do the exact opposite of what I'm telling him to do, right? It's just because of his movement disorder. And he's kind of skewed, right? So I had to learn to coach him in reverse. It's been a real adventure with him. So
I apologize.
no apology necessary.
God was good to us in bringing you here tonight.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So that was kind of an extreme case. And then occasionally, not occasionally, every month in the spring and every month in the winter, my colleague Chris Crisco and I hold squat camps. We call it the Michigan Strength Conspiracy. 1 month we'll hold it at my gym, 1 month we'll hold it at his gym. And people come from all over the country, in fact, from other countries, to come to our squat camps and our deadlift camps and our press camps and stuff like that. And you just never know who's going to sign up for one of those. So working with the same people, even this guy who I have to sort of like train in reverse a little bit, and he's getting strong. And the guy shows up every time. And I'm just in total awe of his courage and his grit and his determination and his discipline. But I'm used to coaching him now. Like, we'll hold these camps, and people will come, and you'll kind of go, huh, okay, I haven't seen that before. What are we going to do? Chris, what are we going to do, right? And so, and what we discovered is that we can get anybody to deadlift. If they can walk through the door, we can get them to deadlift. We can get just about anybody to squat. Press can be a bugaboo, and we can get just about any human being with arms to do a bench press. So, I guess the way I would answer your question is, I'm not sure who the most extreme one is that I've seen, but we got them to squat, press, and deadlift and bench. Right? And if we can do that, then we can make them strong. Next.
So I'm just kind of wondering, I'll try to keep it short. What do you,
Hey,
what do you,
microphone, dude.
oh, microphone.
The audio visual guy?
So I've definitely encountered in my personal life people that have explained to why this is such a good and effective method, but they're still just kind of stubborn and don't want to do it. So my question is kind of, if you have somebody that's really insistent that they don't want to do barbell training, these guys know I'm a big fan of bodyweight strength training. Is it that? Should they be doing yoga? Should they be hiking or being on a stationary bike? So I guess to put it succinctly, we know what the best prescription is, but what do you do with somebody that won't take their meds?
Yeah, somebody who won't take their meds. Well, I guess at the most fundamental, it's the legal course of art you can't make your brain. I can prescribe your antihypertensive medicine. I can prescribe your heart medicine. I can prescribe your insulin. I can't make you take it. I can't. Right? I think I said at the very end of this presentation 2 years ago, this medicine is on you. It's ultimately up to you. In fact, at a real fundamental level, this medicine is entirely self-administered. I mean, so yeah, high blood pressure. Here's your lisinopril, right? It's a fairly trivial thing to take your damn lisinopril every day. It's just not that big a deal. Even if you have diabetes, yeah, it's a pain in the butt. I understand diabetes is a lifestyle thing, and it's a bummer. You have to take your insulin, you have to monitor your glucose. but with a little bit of discipline and a little bit of routine, it just isn't that disruptive to your life, right? And people still won't do it, right? Pretty trivial to take your damn medicine every day. This medicine is different. It's different in a lot of ways. It's self-administered. It requires you to take some ownership of your own health, to take ownership of the medicine, right? To take ownership of your body, to take responsibility, to learn about the stress recovery adaptation syndrome, to learn about nutrition, to learn about the lever arms and the muscles that you're strengthening, to learn about the mechanics of efficient movement, to learn about sleep and hydration and the other recovery activities. And this ties into something else that's really important. You've heard for years that exercise is part of a healthy lifestyle. Who hasn't heard that? It is. And if you don't want to take this form of exercise medicine because it's just too intimidating or it's to this or to that, whatever excuse that you have for not doing this kind of training, that's fine. As long as you get up and do something, just please do something, right? But if you decide to train, to follow the path of the master's athlete and to train, then you're talking about something that is qualitatively different, metaphysically different. Exercise is part of a healthy lifestyle. So stick in the Richard Simmons shape and do sweating the oldies. More power to you. At least you're not sitting on your butt in the eye chair, right? That's good. But training, manipulating training variables is part of the long-term program for the optimization of physical and performance attributes, right? That's not just what you do in the gym. Ripito likes to say, this is really a profound thing. Ripito likes to say, you don't get stronger by lifting weights. You get stronger by recovering from lifting weights. Right? So it's what you do outside of the gym that's also important, equally as important. You have to eat, and you have to eat right. You have to get your protein. You have to get your hydration. You have to get your sleep. You have to get your stress reduction. You can't freak out about every single thing, right? You have to engage in active rest. When you're not training in the gym, when you're a novice, we don't want you to engage in other forms of vigorous physical exercise, especially new forms, but we still want you to move around. We want you to clean out the garage. We want you to walk the dog. We want you to play frisbee with the grandkid. Whatever, right? All of those things are important in the development of strength and in training. So what I've started telling people is, yes, exercise is part of a healthy lifestyle. But because of the emphasis on recovery and the way you live outside of the gym, training is a healthy lifestyle. It's not part of a healthy lifestyle. It is the lifestyle. Because it has an impact on the way you eat, the way you sleep, the way you stay hydrated, how you react to life stressors, and how you respond emotionally to life stressors. All of these things have an impact on your ability to recover and get stronger over time. So this is a form of medicine that becomes very encompassing. It reorients us in ways that are entirely beneficial and salutary, in my opinion. It's a big deal. Any other questions? Ma'am?
How soon after starting the Barbell Prescription do you see improvement in the metabolic syndrome? Lipid panel?
Yeah, we do. That's a pretty common experience that we see in the field. People see improvements in their blood pressure. John C., the 9-year-old, he sends me his vital signs every day. He does. He sends me not just one set. It's like 4 sets every 24 hours, taken throughout the day. So we see improvements in that. We do see improvements in insulin requirement. Doesn't cure diabetes.
How long does it take to start seeing those?
Yeah, it depends. It depends on the individual. It's highly dependent. So for some people, you start to see some improvement right away. Sometimes you see an immediate improvement, and then they fall back a little bit, and then they improve again more slowly. Some people, it takes a long time to see those improvements. And a lot depends on, how brittle of a diabetic they are, how insulin dependent they were before they came in. So people with a more mild form of hypertension, or a more mild form of diabetes, or a more mild sarcopenia, they'll respond more quickly and more substantively. People with more brittle or entrenched disease, it can take a lot longer. And for some of those people, we don't see a significant reversal. What we do is we see that we arrest or slow the progression of the disease. There's no cure here, right? So one of my recent videos was particularly proud of. I'd like a picture of Paracelsus, a medieval German physician that I really admire, and like a modern guy, a modern doctor with the loose and mask and everything. And Paracelsus is saying, I can't cure diabetes. And the modern physician is going, neither can I. Right? So I don't know of anything that will cure those things. But the way we treat diabetes and hypertension and heart disease in allopathic medicine, modern medicine, is we look at the mechanisms underlying it, and we look at the numbers. We especially like to look at the numbers because insurance companies really like to look at the numbers, right? And so we give you a blood pressure medicine, and we give you a blood sugar medicine, and we say, wow, your blood pressure looks better, and your blood sugar looks better. And that's good. We want your blood sugar to look better, and we want your blood pressure to look better, and we want your lipid profile to look better. We do. We have medicines that can force those numbers to be what doctors call euboxic, right? Right numbers in the right boxes. None of which makes you any healthier, because none of that gets to the underlying cause of what's going on. But when we have a medicine that basically helps return you to a pattern of living that you were designed for, and starts to improve your insulin sensitivity and change your lipids and change your muscle and change your tissues that way, then we're getting to the root of the problem. And once the problem becomes entrenched for a certain period of time, once a pathophysiological process progresses for a certain period of time, it becomes very difficult to reverse. So once somebody's diabetic, there are pretty fundamental tissue and genetic level changes that become very difficult to reverse. They may be impossible to reverse. We may never be able to cure diabetes once it's established, simply because of the profound changes that it has at every level of the organism. But we can retard its progression. We might even be able to reverse its progression. Right? So we do see those changes, and they are salutary. What's more profound is the improvement in function, the improvement in strength, the improvement in bone mineral density can sometimes be dramatic. Sometimes it's not, but sometimes it's dramatic. I have a couple of clients who no longer carry a diagnosis of osteoporosis. I would never guarantee that as a result, because different people respond. But we do see pretty profound effects on all of these parameters, depending on the individual. Yes, ma'am.
Obviously, in addition to what other resources or suggestions would you have for someone who's looking to begin to make that this seems intimidating or possibly dangerous?
Yeah, that's kind of a tough one, isn't it? Because it is intimidating. The idea that you're going to bend over and pick up a really heavy barbell, or to put a really heavy barbell on your back and squat down with it and stand up. Or, in some cases, what they're really afraid of is to put the barbell up overhead, right? Some people are just convinced that they're going to drop that barbell on their head. It never happens. So, and they're also not sure that they're going to get the results that they want, that it's not going to hurt them, that it's not going to cause them a lot of pain. People have all kinds of reasons for not wanting to do it, for being intimidated by it. Usually, by the time they come to me, they're a little bit desperate, and they've tried a bunch of other things, right? And all they've done is gotten beat up and sore and kind of not gotten anywhere. So they're kind of ready to take the plunge, but sometimes they're not. And so what I just basically do is two things. First of all, I take them through a movement assessment. This is just part of my business approach, right? My model, my practice, I bring people in for a free initial consultation, and I just sit and listen to them. And I let them talk. And when they're ready, I take them to the platform for like 8 minutes, 10 minutes, with a broomstick and a 5-pound kettlebell, right? And a chair. I have them sit down in the chair and stand up, and I have them lift the broomstick overhead, and I have them lay on the bench to make sure it doesn't hurt their back. And I have them bend over and pick up a 4 or 5-pound kettlebell. Those are movements. And doing that tells me which of those movements are still intact and which of those movements might need to be modified so I can modify them and get them strong. And then, if they can bend over and pick up the 4-pound kettlebell, then I have them pick up the 8-pound kettlebell. And if they can pick up the 8-pound kettlebell, they can almost always pick up the 15-pound kettlebell. Pick up the 15-pound kettlebell. Basically using the deadlift. And I say, okay, here's a 15-pound bar, feel the weight. Hand it to them. Put it in their hands. It's like OJ with the glove. Right? You just put it in their hands. It's a trick. It's a trick. Touch it. Touch it. See? It doesn't bite. Right? And they feel the weight. And I have them put it down on the floor themselves. And then I have a technique plate that weighs 5 pounds. And I tell them, see this spectrum technique plate's really cool. It weighs only 5 pounds. It's made out of recycled tires. Check it out. Hand it to them. Touch it. Now they're connecting. Right? I say, put that plate on the bar. You look at me and put the plate on the bar and say, just like you picked up the kettlebell. I'll walk you through it. Congratulations. You just did a 25-pound barbell kettlebell. And then the second thing I do is I say, give me 1 month. Give me 8 sessions. Just give me 1 month. And if they give me 1 month, actually, if they give me 1 week, that's it. So, all you have to do, it's like a version of it, right? All you have to do is get them to touch it. Get them to do the movement kind of a couple of times. And they'll see, first of all, that it's not going to hurt them. And most people start to see something happening right away. Because they'll do that 25-pound deadlift. And then they'll come in, and the next time, they'll do a 35-pound deadlift, and I'll make them ride it on the wall. And then the next time, they'll do a 45-pound deadlift. And they go, oh, I think I see what's happening. And then you can't keep it out of it. You can't keep it out. That can be handled very good. The power of this becomes really apparent when you start. Other questions? I think it's a wrap. All right, thank you all very much.